A media's representation of women in sport: the good, the bad, and the ugly. Introduction. When anybody hears the name Serena Williams, they immediately recognize her as one of the most accomplished tennis players to ever play the game. But with being the most accomplished, she is also one of the most controversial. From her appearance and what she wears on the court to her bold actions and strong voice, Williams has made the news on numerous accounts. Her masculine features and competitive attitude has been widely criticized, facing disapproval from the media, who tends to delegitimize her position and role as an athlete. After being called out for cheating in a tennis match, Williams smashed her racket out of frustration. After the incident, the media labeled her as being emotional, angry, and irrational. When Marcus Smart, a Boston Celtics player, was ejected from a game after having an altercation with his opponent, some comments that were posted about him were that he doesn't back down from anyone and he brings that type of energy. When male athletes are caught in an aggressive situation, they are normally praised for their competitiveness and passion. However, on the other end, female athletes do not receive that same type of praise. The major issue with women in sport is that they receive negative representation in the media. This is a problem for most female athletes, who make up 40% of sport participants in the world. With the lack of representation and positive exposure for female athletes in women's sports, our society needs to come together to fight the stereotypical norms and gender biases that women are facing in the media by giving female athletes more coverage on sports networks and in written publications, highlighting their athletic talents over their bodies, and overall showing them respect as athletes and not belittling their accomplishments. Along with this, our society needs to come together to support campaigns that focus on women's sports, raise our voices to challenge the biases that the media puts on display, and learn and understand how amazing these athletes are by watching their games and understanding their true athleticism. Section 1. No coverage, no love. Statistically measured, women receive far less coverage on sports networks than men do, and even when women are represented, it is either for their participation in a more feminized sport, such as gymnastics or figure skating, or another topic regarding to them as individuals that have no actual relevance to their athletic abilities or respective sport. Back in 2012, a study was done including ESPN's SportsCenter and 3 Los Angeles networks, and it was shown that women's sports were only 1.6% of SportsCenter's coverage and only 1.4% of the 3 local networks' coverage. This study revealed the lowest coverage percentages for women's sports in over 20 years. This is interesting due to the fact that participation for women in sport has increased since 20 years ago, but they are receiving less coverage than before. Outside of this study, and on average today, women's sports receive less than 10% of sport media coverage, and less than 2% of that coverage is on women's sports that are recognized as more masculine, such as rugby or soccer. The big issue with sports media today is that they use words such as femininity and masculinity to help define and label female athletes. The biggest issue with using these words is that masculinity can be overlapped with what people think an athlete is. There's similar characteristics, masculine meaning you're dominant, you're strong and assertive, while being an athlete is usually recognized as having mental toughness, being competitive and aggressive, and these traits are very similar and intertwine with the ideas of being a masculine athlete, which shows why viewers are so much more accepting of male athletes, is because they fit the description of what an athlete is supposed to be, and because the media won't report on female athletes who play sports that are more masculine. It really goes to show that there's this idea and there's this stereotype of male athletes being masculine and female athletes are the only ones who can be feminized. Because the media tends to report on mainly masculinized male athletics, I believe that whether unintentional or intentional, they want to uphold a certain standard where male superiority dominates the industry. This is displayed through the sport media commercial complex, which looks at different parts of the media and how they portray male and female athletes. By choosing to cover and represent these male athletes far more than the female athletes, They are feeding into the idea of hegemonic masculinity, which is a practice that legitimizes men's dominant position in society and justifies the subordination of the common male population and women. If the media were to decide to cover more women's sports, then the divide between the sexes lessens and female athletes begin to threaten the reputation of male superiority within the industry. Section 2. What the media says goes. It is not only the lack of coverage for female athletes that is a serious problem in the sports industry, it's also how women's sports are being televised when they are covered that is also an issue. Women's sports are seen as boring, slow, and overall less exciting than men's sport. This is because when men's sports are covered, they receive higher production values, higher quality coverage, and higher quality commentary over female athletes in their sport. What helps with the idea of women's sports being less exciting is the relevance of the media and their thoughts on the topic. Because viewers are more likely to shape their opinions based off of what the media says, this is considered the framing theory, which is where the audience is thought to adopt the frames of references offered by journalists and to see the world in a similar way. When women's sports or female athletes are de-emphasized in the media, it helps to change the views of the audience to match more negative depictions, whether they have or have not watched women play before. There have been many instances where commentators have referred to female athletes as inferior. Journalists have told their viewers that women's sports are not worth watching, or in general, women's sports are too boring compared to men's sports. Because the people working in the industry as well as the general public do not speak up about the injustices that these female athletes face by being labeled and mistreated in the media, these challenges will continue for these women, and unless any changes are made, these women will continue to struggle in working within this male-dominated industry. Section 3. Sex sells, right? We place a lot of the blame on the people working in the industry when female athletes or people in general are mistreated or negatively represented by the media. The fact of the matter is a lot of the topics that the media covers are already pre-existing ideas within our society that have been reformulated in the media to reach a larger audience. Because of this, there are a lot of discussions, videos, and posts that focus more on a female athlete's outer appearance and not their athletic capabilities. Although it may not always be intentional, the media tends to sexualize these athletes and represent them in a way that would meet the traditional feminine roles that society has already created. There is a wide-known belief that sex sells, and with women's sports, that belief seems to be very valid to a lot of media viewers. A sport like beach volleyball is known to practice this belief, as these athletes are forced to wear skimpy bikinis when they compete. However, we cannot just think about beach volleyball with the idea of hypersexualization in sport, because there are so many other sports and female athletes in general who are giving into the idea of sex sells, purposely showing off their bodies to gain any type of exposure they can get for themselves and for their sport. If we take a look at social media platforms today, we can see which athletes are purposely sexualizing themselves, which ones are not at all, and which ones carry a dual identity, which is a mix of their athletic identity as well as a more feminine identity. No matter how female athletes choose to represent themselves, they tend to be sexualized within the media with no mention of their athletic capabilities or accomplishments. However, it is not always the media who starts these controversial stereotypes that are placed on female athletes, but it is us, the public, who have created these ideas and norms that seem to stick with us, which are then exposed even more through the media. The media is the second problem in this process of sexualizing female athletes. The first problem is our society, and what we need to do as a community is change the stigma of the sexualized portrayal of female athletes within the media. Conclusion. Moving forward one post at a time. Looking back at everything that these female athletes have been faced with, what we need to do as a society is to make changes within the sport industry to help women's sports get the coverage they deserve and give these individual athletes a chance to display their incredible athleticism and passion. What we need to do is start advocating more actively on social media platforms, help in running more women-inspired campaigns, making sure we're coming together with the men in the sport industry to gain more support for women's sports and female athletes in general, and also increasing the women actively working in the sport industry to allow for more growth and more representation for these females. To conclude, our society can infiltrate change and be the start in ending the negative exposure that female athletes face, while also pushing for an increase in coverage on women, because the reality of the situation is that women are worth watching and they are worthy of being seen as the true athletes they are.